All right, track and balance. Before you start doing some track and balance, there's a couple things you really got to do. You got to look at all the weights on each blade, and you got to record what's on there. Just write it down. Another thing you got to do is look at each trim tab, check and see what is on the trim tab or what the trim tabs are measuring at, the numbers in millimeters, and write them down. And you need to make sure that the inboard and outboard trim tabs match each other, okay? Because if they're off, you're going to have problems. That's going to be a problem throughout the whole time until you reach the tab part, and then you'll figure it out then, which is kind of late in the game. Another thing you need to do before you do track and balance is you need to set up your track and balance gear. The gear that we're using is the Microvibe 2, and it seems to be pretty legit. I just use it for the numbers, man. Some guys have really good success with doing what the box tells them to do, but to be honest, I've never done that because I guess I don't really know how to use the machine. I use the machine to get the numbers and look at the track and look at the vibration, and I just write it down and I figure it out. It's not too hard, and that's what we're going to go through today. But look, if you're whatever machine you're using, just make sure it's set up for your aircraft. So for the Microvibe 2, you need to set up a new history file, and more importantly than that, you need to make sure that there's an EC135 group file on it. That's the aircraft we're doing track and balance on today, EC135. And if there's not a group file on there, you need to go ahead and figure that out way before you start doing track and balance, okay? We can go over that in another video, but we're not going to do any Microvibe screenshots today, maybe a couple, but that's it, all right? So before we get started with track and balance, we're going to need to go through just some quick basics on track and balance and what it is, okay? Mainly, you need to know that track affects balance. So number one, adjust for track. That will fix a lot of your weight problems. Then adjust for high-speed track, and then come back and adjust weight at the end. So that's the basics of track and balance. We're just going to go through it step by step and see how to do these things. So let's assume everything's ready for track and balance. You're on the ground, you do a ground vibration check, and you shoot your track and you see what you have, okay? And if it's good enough to do a hover, go do that. If it's not, you need to make some adjustments. So for us, this is what we got. I like to look at the vibration. I put it on this chart. You get this out of the maintenance manual. It's just a polar chart. Shows you the each one of these rings shows you the IPS in 0.1. And if you go down on this chart, it shows you how to move your IPS to the left or right. And if you go to the right on this chart, it shows you what adjustments you need to make to move your IPS up or down on this polar chart. Let's go through it real quick. So if we zoom into this polar chart, it's in clock angles, and what we need is degrees. So 0 to 360, so you just put down 30, 60, 90, all the way to 360 on the clock angle. But we can plot our first ground measurement is 0.065 at 9.3. And that's a little bit further away than we want it to. It's pretty far out on the chart. So let's zoom in on this chart, see what Airbus recommends that we do to fix this. So if you look at the chart and you go down from where we're at, we're the green dot at the top, top right. So if you zoom down, it shows you at the bottom of this chart the amount of grams to put in on the blade cuffs to get the right balance. Okay, and if we need to move left on this chart, which is what we really need to do, we also need to move down, but we really need to move left. We're really far out, okay? What it wants is to add weight to yellow. Or if there's weight on blue, then take it off of blue. The max is 250 grams in a blade cuff. That's a lot of weight. And it's asking for, honestly, right here, over 360 grams. So, you know, if you're getting this and you have no weight, or you're maxed out on yellow and you still have this, you're screwed. You probably got water in your blade, and I don't think there's any coming back from that. You might be able to make some simple adjustments on PC links if the track is way out, and then that will move your CG, but I would recommend doing that before you order a blade because they're kind of not cheap, right? Either way, well, lucky for us, there was 191 grams on the blue blade. So we took that off and we put 181 grams on the yellow blade. That's a total of 372 grams. That puts us pretty close to where it says on this chart will work for us. We also added 110 grams to green. Before we go out there and shoot the next track and balance, here's a quick look at the weights on a blade cuff. Not the blade cuff we're working on, but just one we've seen before, and just a quick tip, all right? All right, when you're checking the weight on the top of the blades, you want to make sure that the bottom weights are smaller. You can't put the big weights on the bottom of the stack up because they'll hit this cuff right here. You see how there's a gap where these are not hitting this? It's because it's like 3 smaller weights underneath the stack up. So this one right here is maxed out with weight, but when you're doing this job, just make sure right here doesn't hit. All right, so we go out and we run the aircraft again on the ground. We shoot the track and balance. Man, it looks really good. The lateral came in really nicely. What did we end up getting? We get to 0.09 at 344, which is really nice. So we're gonna go ahead and do a hover and see what we have in a hover. The hover looks real good. It's 0.092 at 316. The vibration's good, but since we're here, let's see what the vertical vibe is. Vertical vibe isn't anything crazy. It is 0.20 at 213. That's the vertical, so weight's not going to fix that, just PC links and trim tabs. But let's check out the track first. Maybe we can make some more adjustments before we go fly. The way I do it is I write down the track. The box will show me what the track is. I just write it down. And for you guys, I put it on this nice chart. It helps you visualize what you're doing. It visualizes where the blades fly throughout the whole flight regime. You can see how it changes from the ground to a hover and all the way up to, 130, 135 knots. But usually when I'm doing this, I don't have it all in a nice, this sheet right here, which would be nice. It looks more like this, which isn't nice. And this is actually a better version of how I normally do it. Anyway. Okay, so let's look at what we shot for track on the ground and then again in the hover. And if you take a look, I drew these lines on here so you could visualize the blades, what color they are and which direction they're going from the ground to a hover. The blue blade and red blade go up together from ground to hover, and then the green blade goes down a little bit and the yellow blade goes down a whole bunch. The yellow blade starts low and the yellow blade goes down lower, so the blue blade starts high and goes up higher. Most people don't want to touch the yellow blade, so we're going to go with the blue blade first. Also on this chart, I write down the distance is peak to peak. It gives it to you on the microvibe box. So on the ground, it was just a little bit more than 6 millimeters peak to peak. That means the high blade to the low blade. And then in the hover, it was a little bit more than 13 millimeters peak to peak. That's nothing crazy, actually, on the ground. But since, like I said, we're weathered in, we're going to make some adjustments here. Before we get too far along in this track and balance, we're going to need to just take a quick look at what the maintenance manual says. Granted, it may change by the time you watch this video, so take a look at the current revision of the maintenance manual. Like I said before, I assume no liability of your track and balance or any other maintenance you perform. You need to check out the maintenance manual and the current revision. Like, that's on you, not me. So there's that. So just take a look at the manual right here. This is important. It's changed. The track and balance limits have changed on the EC135 in the last year or so, or two or so. But right here, during the track and balance procedures, your limits are pretty high. If you look at here, the ground run limit is 0.6. That's wicked high. This is lateral limits. Okay, this is out of balance. So the hover ground effect, 0.4. 80 and 120 knots is also 0.4 IPS. That's wicked high. Dude, you're never going to release an aircraft like that. They're going to be so angry at you, man. The crews are going to be so mad, right? The helicopter is going to shake itself apart after a year of flying like this. Anyway, if you look at this note says, during balancing, no limits for the vertical imbalance are applicable. There are at the end before you release the aircraft, but while you're doing the track and balance, we're not going to look at the vertical, or that's not going to stop us from moving forward, okay? So we've decided to move the PC link on the blue blade down a turn. Quick look at a video on adjusting the PC links. Nothing crazy in depth, but just a quick overview, okay? So I cut the safety wire off here. Here, you need two 14mm wrenches to hold the PC link and then break that nut loose. And then down here is a 17 and a 14. But I'm gonna mark it right here and here, so we know how many turns we're doing. Okay, I marked it. I loosened the jam nut, top and bottom. I got as much of that silicone whacker out as I could. Just a quick note, when you're working up here, you're doing the safety wire or cutting safety wire or anything like that. On the EC135s, this is all intake area. Everything goes into there and down that tunnel into the engine intake. So if there's any cut cotter pins, anything else, it's going to end up going down there. So make sure whatever you end up cutting off, like the safety wire here or any cotter pins anywhere around here, you catch the other end and you throw it away. Just a heads up. All right, so we're gonna do on the EC135, it's the left hand rule. Left hand, grab it like this, and if you turn it wherever your fingers are going this way, that goes up. If you're going to go down, turn it that way, and it goes down. So we're gonna do 2 full turns. Unlock this pin here, and you can only turn it 90 degrees because then it has to lock back in. So 1 whole turn, that's 1 turn, and that's 2 turns. When you're doing it, you want to make sure you don't see red inside of here after you bring this jam nut down. I don't see any red there. There's definitely not any red there. That means it's too extended if you see red inside of that rod end. Anyway, I'm gonna cinch it up. So it's tightened right here. The lines match here and here and here and here. The PC or the rod ends have to be 90 degrees. See how we're looking at this one straight on, and we're looking at this one 90 degrees. So just make sure of that. The locks are in place and it's cinched up. I'm going to safety wire it, both of these, and at the very end you put whacker on the top, but we're not going to do that until we're all done. Okay, I know that video was of a green PC link, but with the helicopter we were working on right now, we're bringing the blue PC link down half a turn. So we're going to go ahead and do a flight right now. Check it out. Now that we made the PC link move, we're going to go ahead and see how it pans out. So we got the numbers off of the ground and a hover. You can see that the ground didn't change at all for the lateral vibration, but the hover did. It went from 0.092 down to 0.55, and it moved it on the chart also in a direction that we like. The hover's the red line. So the lateral out of balance, that got better, and then also the vertical IPS got better to move it exactly in the right direction. It moved it to 0.127. All right, now next let's see what our track looks like. Okay, so after bringing the blue blade down just half a turn, you could see that it brought it down on the ground and it also brought it down in a hover, not like we thought it would do. The yellow's still flying pretty low though in a hover. The other blades are in the positive number. Yellow's way low. So we're gonna adjust the yellow. We're gonna bring the yellow up half a turn and see what happens. So adjusting the yellow main rotor blade isn't really preferred. What Airbus really wants you to do is adjust all the blades to your yellow blade. The only place that I could find that in the maintenance manual is on the removal and installation of the rotating control rods, the pitch change links. At the very bottom, it says, the very last step, it says check the adjustment of the collective stop, or the pitch, which is the pitch stop, if the yellow PC link was replaced, disassembled, and reassembled, and then reinstalled. Okay, so if you adjust the yellow PC link, you need to do the collective stop adjustment, or also known as the pitch stop adjustment check. All right, just keep that in mind. So we take a look at the lateral vibration now after that, moving the yellow blade. The ground stayed the same. It's 0.095 at 23. And in the hover, it went from 0.055 down to 0.030, which is really nice. So we got weather now where we could fly. So we're about to go do our 80, 120, and close to 140 as we can get. We don't usually get around 135. So we're going to shoot that, see what the vertical vibration is, and also shoot our track and see what that looks like. See if we could smooth this thing out a little bit. Okay, now that we did our full flight regime for the first time, we did check the lateral vibration at 80 knots, and it was, which is your out of balance, and that was 0.039 at 297. So 0.04 is really good. And if we go and we look at the vertical vibration for the whole flight, the hover flight is moving in a good direction. It went from 0.127 to 0.09, and our 80 knots is 0.07. Our 120 knot, the vertical vibration is 0.134, and at 135 knots, our vertical vibration is 0.1. So our final limits are different than our track and balance interim limits. Our final limits are 0.12 vertical. The only thing out of limits right now is our vertical at 120 knots. It's 0.134, which is just a little bit above. And to be honest, you could shoot the track. Look, I shoot the track like 3 times, 2 or 3 times. Usually I'll shoot it into the wind. I'll turn around and shoot it back. While we're flying back, I'll shoot it one more time. So I'll get the track and the vertical twice. And then, while I'm looking at it, I can make a decision on the best thing. But honestly, you could shoot it 3 times and the track can look totally different. And sometimes that just gets frustrating. But It is what it is. After moving the yellow PC link up, you could tell, man, it made a big difference from the hover. It went from negative 6.5 down to negative 1. It's looking pretty good. Now we look at the blue blade. The blue blade, which is the opposite blade of yellow, moved the opposite direction that we moved the yellow PC link, right? So it was up high at 4.5, and now it's down low at negative 1.5, flying with the other blades. So it's looking pretty good. But if we look at the rest of the flight that we did, 80 knots, 100 knots, and about 35 knots, there's one thing that sticks out big time, right? The green blade. The green blade, once you start moving forward, 80 knots, 120 knots, 140, man, it starts flying higher the faster you go. And if you look at it's under the section that says 140 knots, but from 120 to 140, it says 12 millimeters above. But if you look at the block for 120 and 140, you look at the other blades, it looks like they flew lower. Yeah, they didn't fly lower. Green just kept flying higher. But on this chart, it doesn't really look that way. But when we draw it out and we look at each blade throughout the whole flight regime, and you can see how they're flying. The other thing, if we look at the peak to peak, it got better in the ground. It's 3 millimeters peak to peak in the ground. In the hover, it got way better. It's just about 5 millimeters. 80 knots, 8.7 millimeters. 120 knots, 15 millimeters. And 140 knots is 16.8 millimeters, which isn't crazy. So as of right now, the only thing that's out of limits is the 120 knot vertical vibration. It's above 0.12. It's at 0.134. And if you shot it again, it might be fine. If you depending on the wind, depending on how you're flying against the wind, it might be fine. But honestly, this one is really close. So what should we do? If we look at the green blade is flying crazy high above all the other blades, well, the faster you go, the further it flies apart. Well, that's a trim tab adjustment. So let's take a quick look on how to adjust trim tabs. It's not hard. It's not complicated. There's another video that I made for this. Reading the dial indicator is complicated. I've screwed it up a bunch of times. So anyway, quick video on that. This isn't the whole video. There's an in-depth video. I'll put it in the link in the description. Okay, we got the trim tab tool up there. This is the bender. This is the tool that checks how much it's bent. So let's see what we have. First, let's look at the tab. If we look at the number, it looks like it's 5.32. So you grab the top, pull it up a little bit, and then you could slowly bring it down so you can get your brain wrapped around it. I've screwed this up plenty of times, trust me. 5, keeps going till it hits the stop. 5.35, I got the 5.35. Great, let's check the other one. A neutral trim tab is 5.0. That one's 5.32, not a big deal. You don't want it to read 5.0 and the other one's 5.3. You're gonna have huge problems, okay? You're gonna have a vibration you can't get rid of. All right, just so we have an idea of what we're doing here, if you wanna bend it, if you wanna go up, it gets a smaller number. See how it goes smaller? If you wanna bend it down, it gets a bigger number, okay? Yeah. After you bend it, you're gonna wanna try to, if you bend it up far and then come back down. Anyway, when you're done, take the weight of the bender off of it, and then go up and down with the micrometer. 5.34, 5.33, cool. But you could get this dialed in real good. 5.34, yep, 5.33, so we're good there. What we ended up doing is we ended up bending the green trim tabs, or the trim tabs on the green blade down 1.0 millimeters. We made sure they were the same amount, and then we went on a whole nother flight regime. So let's see what those numbers look like. The vertical vibration got better. There's a quick plot right here from what they were to what they went to. So everything's within limits, but let's just take a quick look at the track since we spent the time to do it. The green blade went from a plus 12 millimeters to a negative 2.2 at 120 knots, and at 140 knots, it went down to a negative 2. So it's flying together fairly well with the other blades. And the track for the whole flight regime was pretty good when you look at the peak-to-peak spread. I mean, at the ground, it was under 5. Hover, it was 5.8. 80 knots, it was 3.6 millimeters. That's nothing. 120 knots, it was 5.6. And at 140 knots, or 132 knots, it was 4.6 millimeters peak-to-peak, which is really nothing, honestly. But when you're flying in it, when you're flying in the aircraft, from the last flight to this flight, at 120 knots, it had a vibration. It was a pretty decent vibration. After we bent the trim tabs, it still has a vibration. Is it better? Yes. Can it get better? Yeah, it can get better. And looking at this tracking chart that we have here, I don't know. I would just say the other three blades, look at red is flying high. Is higher. Red is flying higher than all of the other three blades. The blue, yellow, and green are at 0 or below for pretty much the whole flight, forward flight. But red is above at the whole time. Don't really look at the ground too much, but hover, the red is high, 80 knots, 120 knots, and 140 knots, red's high. You can make two moves here. You can either come up with the green a little bit. PC link is what I do, or the red you can come down. And what we ended up doing is we ended up coming down on the red a quarter turn. So let's see what kind of results we got from that. But we didn't have to. We're within limits right now. Look, but the thing on this flight right here, we had clouds, high clouds, like we could fly at 120 knots, but we had to do some checks where we needed to get to 9,500 feet, and we couldn't do that because we had bad weather at high altitude. So we had time to tweak it. And it's funny because the guy I was working with, when I said, hey, look, man, I'm going to roll that red PC link a quarter turn, he rolled his eyes. he's like thinking, serious, buddy? Aren't we done? I'm like, no, man, we could tweak this thing. So we tweaked it, and we'll see what happened with the results. So after making the PC link move on the red and bringing it down a quarter turn, the numbers turned out pretty good. If you look on the track chart right here, I mean, even a hover, it went down from a 3 point, what it was it at? Went down from a 3.5 to a 2.2. 80 knots, it started flying with them. It started flying with the other blades, honestly. Like, no difference. 120 knots, flying perfect. 140 knots, flying great. So, yeah, that was good. All right, if we take a look at the peak to peak, now on the ground, it's 5.3. In a hover, it's 4.7. And, man, that's really good. And at 80 knots, 120 knots, and say 130 knots plus, it's 2 millimeters peak to peak spread. That actually panned out pretty good for us. That was the last move we did. Let's look at the final numbers on the lateral. The balance is 0.09, 0.092 on the ground, and in the hover, it's 0.040. So just changing the red PC link down a quarter turn in the hover, the lateral, not the vertical, but the lateral, went from 0.05 to 0.04. Impressive. And then the vertical went from a 0.1 in a hover to a 0.05. Yeah, final numbers for the vertical, 0.050 for the hover, 0.052 at 80 knots, 0.069, let's just say 0.07 at 120 knots, and 0.09 at 135 knots. So that's really good. And let's zoom into the track a little bit more real fast. I guess looking over all the numbers, if I was to do anything, honestly, I would like to make one more move. Probably bring red down another quarter of a turn. And after that, you might have to bring the tab up a little bit. But anyway, the point is it smoothed out really nice. So here's the final out of balance. What are you going to do with that? The ground is, just under 0.1 above the line. And in a hover, it's, what is it? 0.04. Below the line. Are you going to add weight there? No, you're not going to add weight there. You're just not going to add weight there. So if you added weight to green, the ground will come in and hover will go out. Like, it's not going to work. The only way to make that better is a PC link move or a trim tab move or a combination of both. But either way, they're within limits, way within limits. So no complaints. All right, that's it for the track and balance training video. It's just a quick once over on the whole concept of track and balance. Just trying to help you guys out, because I know that a lot of people don't like track and balance. They think it's magic, or they think the box is magic or whatever. Yeah, the box is magic, but whatever, dude. To be honest, I don't use the box. I just use the box to get numbers, and it's not hard. But also, I have to give you this. The helicopter I was working on, all four of its blades had the same time on them. It had the machine had almost 5,500 hours on it, and all the blades are original, and they've been flying together their entire life. The helicopter also stays in the hangar, so it doesn't get rained on, and water's not getting into the blades all the time. It does fly IFR, but it doesn't sit outside in the weather. So that helps. That makes it easier. You know, if you get a blade or you get two blades, or if you have to replace a new blade and the time is way off from your other three blades, you're going to have some problems. It's just going to take you forever, and it may never get smooth. That's why the track and balance limits are pretty high. But if you have a machine that's pretty solid, you could tweak it and you could make it real smooth. And that's what the customer wants, you know, so. All right, guys, that's it for the track and balance video. I hope you guys found some value in it, and I'll talk to you guys next time, all right? All right, later.